So welcome. Thank you for joining us. And of course, we'll start with a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
The stuff in some ways is just so relevant. So we're going to look at a Torah Temimah just to go back because we finished at verse 28 yesterday, but I think this Torah Temimah has something to tell us that I think is very interesting and is a principle that is worth being aware of, and I think will add to your consciousness of some of the thought that goes behind here. So I'm going to try and see what I can do here before we okay. So what's going to come out is that there's going to be an awareness, right? I love the way in which it sort of acts like a detective, right? In other words, those tiny little details sometimes are the way in which the case is solved, right? It's some tiny detail that gives you the clue for the case. And so there was a detail here that I really liked that the Torah Temimah is going to bring out. So remember, so Moses says to them, just to review a little bit, I'm giving you today a blessing or a curse, right? And then he talks about the bracha, and it simply says, which you hearken to the commandments which the Lord your God is giving you today, period. Now look at and we talked about this word asher yesterday extensively, and we derived a really interesting point about the nature of the blessing as opposed to the curses. But we're going to see a different distinction now. So he talks about the klala, right? And it looks very similar. And the blessing if you do the commandments, and the curse if you do not hearken to the commandments, right? The negative of the Lord your God. Keep going. But look at this. And it goes on and says, and you turn away from the way which I command you today, right? That's one point. So does that parallel this? Yes. So in a sense, this it goes on, right? This Asher Anochi Mitzvah Yom here Im Lo Tishmu Et Al Mitzvot Adonai Elohechem, right? That's a parallel. But look how it goes on, right? It says specifically, and you turn away from the path which I command you this. And not only that, it goes on to be even more specific, right? It's a generality to say, and you turn away from following the mitzvot. But it goes on to say that it goes on to be specific. It says to follow after other gods which you have not experienced. So that is a specific of turning away. There are lots of ways in which you may choose to ignore the commandments, but this is a specific one. And we note that in the positive, it didn't say that, right? It didn't give you that specific, but it does say it here. And this is where the Torah Temimah is going to be very helpful. He is going to make a point that is going to be a little bit more on the technical side. We'd have to go back to a previous book and look at something there. He's going to make a mention of that, and we'll walk through it. But here goes. Let's take a look at this. V'sartem, and you turn aside. Mikan amru. This is going to be familiar to those of you who were here yesterday, right? Kol ha-modeh ba'avodat kochavim, right? Anyone who acknowledges the validity of idolatry, kekofer b'chol Torah. It's as if they denied the entire Torah, right? V'chol hakofer ba'avodat kochavim, but anyone who denies the validity of idolatry, look at this, kemoreh b'chol haTorah. It's as if he, in fact, does practice the entire, or modeh. I think this is not moreh, but modeh. This should be a daled. Kemodeh b'chol Torah is one who acknowledges the entire Torah, right? Like the modeh up here. So this is interesting, right? That just one specific mitzvah, the turning away from idolatry. Yesterday we discussed a little bit the sense in which people don't understand what idolatry is. I lean back on Yechezkel Kaufman, Dr. Yechezkel Kaufman, from years ago, who points out that there's a confusion between idolatry and fetishism, that the Torah tends, or the Bible tends to describe idolatry as actually fetishism, which is, worshiping images, right? Whereas idolatry really is the worship of something other than the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? And I describe, the creator of the universe. the source of all existence. And we discussed yesterday briefly understanding the nature of worship. So I want to go on now to what he says here. So this is actually Baruch Halevi Epstein's comment on this statement. So, and he shows the mechanics of it to begin with. Tam hadrasha, the underlying meaning of this drasha, of this interpretation, pashut, is straightforward. The medayek, that he notes, right? He notes out that shehitchil bahash mi'ah el mitzvot Hashem b'chalal, that he starts off with the notion of paying attention, following, right, listening to, hearkening to the commandments of the Lord, as a generalization, right? It's a generalization. V'siyem biprat, but this verse ends with a specific be'inyan avodah zara, with the issue of specifically idolatry, shma mina, and from this you can derive, right, shishakul inyan avodah zara, because this issue, the specific of idolatry, right, is mentioned here, that it has the same weight, right? It has the same meaning, right? Keneged kol mitzvot Torah, that it stands for something as opposed to all the commandments of the Torah. Uchidamaresh mefaresh, and as he goes on to explain, she'im kofer ba, that if in fact he denies, and I believe here he's talking about idolatry, right? If he denies the validity and rejects idolatry, hevei k'modeh b'chol Torah, it has the equivalency of accepting and upholding and acknowledging the validity of the Torah. And just the same, the opposite, right? Either one or the other. So this is where he gets a little bit technical, and it'll take us down to here. I can do it just to be complete, but I'm going to try and move fairly quickly if I can, right? Uva Yerushalmi, and in the Talmud Yerushalmi Nidarim, the tractate Nidarim, right? Vows, Perek Gimel Halacha Tet, he gives you the reference, right? Chapter 3, the ninth halacha. Uv'ad drasha acheret. There's a different drasha, drash, the inyan zeh, regarding the same issue, mipasuk de Parshat Shlach. So this is back in the book of Numbers, and actually back in the book of Numbers, he does discuss this in general. V'chi tishku v'lo ta'asu, where it says, and if you fall away, you make a mistake, you err, right, and don't perform, etc. Ye'uyan sham. So he doesn't give you the whole verse here. Ye'uyan sham, check it out. Lefanenu, in this previous section. The drasha zo, so he goes on to just say, the drasha zo shelefanenu, but he says this particular drasha that we're looking at right now, mechuvenet yoter li'inyan zeh. It is tighter. It's a tighter argument with regards to this idea of idolatry being compared to upholding all the Torah, and rejecting idolatry, right, as being that, and accepting idolatry as rejecting all of Torah. Sha'arei kan, and he explains why. Misayem meforash, because here it says specifically in this particular passage, v'sartem lalechet acharei Elohim acherim, because here it says, and if you turn aside to follow other gods, masha'enochen hatam, because it doesn't say that so specifically there in that other passage, eino meforash b'kra. It doesn't say it specifically in the scriptural verse, the Be'isur Avodat Kochavim Eirei. That verse is actually dealing with the prohibition of idolatry. That's what it's talking about. V'rak adrasha ate sham, but it's only through interpretation, through drushing out, that you can arrive kamavo arsham lefanenu, as you can see clearly before us if you go back to that passage. The iyen on, so that's the technicality. The iyen od Be'iyan zeh, and you can also look at this particular idea, right? This comparing of idolatry to upholding the whole Torah. That's an interesting thought, right? Barambam in Maimonides, Perek Gimel. So he's talking, I'm sure, about the Yad HaChazakah, right? Maimonides' companion of Halacha, chapter 3, Halacha Dalet, Halacha 4 of Avodah Zarah. That's the section that he's referring to, right, in the Yad. V'da devichlal, and know that in general, yesh ladun alma shebahabracha, that one should think about, right? One should judge about or reflect on what is on the fact shebahabracha, that with regard to the blessing, katsar. It's the verse is short. It doesn't go into those specifics, right? Just talks of generality. Lomar rak asher tishma'u. He just says, as long as you hearken to the mitzvahs. He doesn't go into explaining what specific mitzvah. It doesn't go on to say and reject idolatry. It doesn't say any of those things, right? Uveklala herich. But with regard to the curse, there he goes into details, right? Im lo tishma'u. He goes on to say, if you do not hearken, v'sartem min haderech, and you turn aside from the way, etc. V'yesh lomar, and one could say, bebiur hadavar, that in explaining this issue here, or this distinction that they make, al pima shidma dekaimalan. This is the principle that I was referring to before. This interesting idea. What we accept, we find the Kiddushin Mem Aleph in Babylonian Talmud Kiddushin, Tractate Kiddushin, page 40a, Uvachama Makomot, and in other places, Machshava Tova. This is the principle that if it is a good thought, if it's a positive thought, Hakadosh Baruch Hu Metzarfa Lamaseh, that in that particular case, the Holy One, blessed be He considers the very fact that you're thinking of doing something good. He associates it, he gives you credit. This is the point that's going to be making. He attaches it to the actual practice. In other words, if you seriously are thinking of doing something positive, God gives you credit as if you're already doing it, right? He connects it to the actual practice. But that is not the case. Machshava ra'ah. If you have a bad thought, if you have a wicked thought, he does not assume or take into account that you've done it already, that you've put into practice your wicked thought. V'lachen bivracha, and for this reason, bivracha, when it came to the blessing, Amar, he says, Shaddai rak, it's enough, right? It's enough. Im tishmu el mitzvot Hashem, if you hearken to the commandments of the Lord, right? I mean, it can't be just lip service, but nevertheless, it's saying you're considering them seriously, okay? Klomar, that is to say, shetikablum aleichem, that you accept upon yourself the notion of commandedness, of divine commandedness. Do you have a question? Harlan, you want to make a point?
Yeah, I was going to say that if your friends or your wife or your mother or something says, "Oh, let's not worry about God. Let's worship other people, other gods." I mean, they can turn you away from God very easily. Your friends can do that, and also false prophets can do that too. False prophets are terrible. I wouldn't know if a prophet was real or false. So that's what I'm saying. They can turn you away from God. And it's very, very wicked, very bad.
Okay, Harlan, yes, you're right. But in this particular case, what we're talking about is something else. We're talking here about the credit that God gives you as a human being, and the distinction that God makes, that if you want to act in a righteous way, you can, before you even actually do, it's one thing to think about something, and of course you are living in the show me state, right? And that's exactly what this is about, right? It's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to actually put it into practice, right? To show me. And it's saying, in a sense, that God is not saying, show me if you have a positive thought, but if you have a bad thought, God waits for you to show him. So let me finish this comment, and you'll see the point that's being made here. So the point you're making is a very good point. It's just not what's being discussed right this minute, okay? And it does go on. The Torah portion, without doubt, goes on to talk about a false prophet, etc., etc. Az miyad, so if you are willing to accept the concept of divine commandedness upon yourself, az miyad, immediately, henchem b'chlal bracha, you're now blessed. You're now included in the notion of the bracha. Me she'enochem, which is not the case. Let's see if I can do this. Biklala, when it comes to the curse. As enchem b'chlal kala, you are not considered to be included in those to be cursed, right? In the general category of being cursed. Ad shita asu, okay, until you actually do. And I'm trying to make out this word, okay. It's very hard for me to recognize what this word is. I don't know if it's printed differently, but I just cannot even make out the word. But it says bepoal. Even this is badly printed, right? Or unless it's, I don't know, midama or midame bepoal, until you actually, the point is that it's saying until you actually put it into practice, until you actually do it. V'sartim min haderech, and you turn away. So when you turn away from the path, asher anochi mitzaveh, which I command, etc. V'chol shelo ta'asu ma'aseh, and as long as you don't actually, you have a wicked thought, but you don't actually put into practice that wicked thought, you don't do it, lo titztaref lachem, you will not be machshavatchem. He does not connect, right? Connect for you your wicked thought, machshavatem hara'ah, l'maaseh, to actually doing it. And I think that's really important. I think that what we just shared today is really an important issue, because thoughts are thoughts. Thoughts are thoughts. And I don't think there's anyone who doesn't have a dark side and has thought wicked thoughts, but to know, I mean, not, of course, you don't want to obsess over these things. You want to try and avoid obsessing over these kinds of things. But the fact that that alone is not enough for God to put you into a category of those who deserve to be cursed. And I'm willing to, happy to throw this open for a moment for your reactions. Do you have a moment? Do you want to take a look? Otherwise, I can continue. We've got a little more time. Did you want to comment? Yes? No? Okay. All right. Golda, you have anything you want to say? Okay. All right. I thought it was
just okay. Moving on. Let's go.
Okay. I just thought it was a good point. I thought it was
a good point. Yeah. Let's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna
go more.
Okay. Coming right up. And it's great to see Karen. Happy to have you back. Vahaya, so we're going to go on with the verse now. Vahaya ki yaviacha, and it shall be when I'm going to do the phrase ki yaviacha Hashem Elokecha, when the Lord your God brings you el haaretz, to the land, asher ata vashama l'rishta, which you are coming there to inherit, right? V'natata, and you shall place et bracha, the blessing, al har Grizim, on Mount Grizim, the et haklala, al har Eval, and the curse, on Har Eval, on Mount Eval. And yesterday, I showed some pictures of it. You could see to some extent, it wasn't terribly clear. These mountains are very close to each other. It looks like Shechem is right in between, and the one mountain is barren. So the Mount Eval is somewhat barren, and Har Grizim, on the other hand, is somewhat fertile. And I think that was to sort of give a sense of a reality of the distinction between being blessed and being cursed, right? So that it would try and reinforce the importance of making this choice and recognizing that we fall one way or the other. It's strictly binary. There's no sort of in between here. You either move in one direction or you move in another direction. So this
Does that direction mean that on curses that we do adultery, we don't take care of the orphans and the widows and the strangers and
yes,
stuff like that?
those are all included. Remember, there's 613 mitzvahs, and again, they're there to give us something to journey on throughout our lives. But it starts with the rejection of idolatry, the recognition of what idolatry is, and refusing and not being tempted to follow it. And our impulses very often will draw us into that, but the very act of refusing to give into our impulse towards idolatry is already considered, that is like the foundation side of things. So that I would say is the negative side. The positive side is loving Hashem with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That's the positive side.
Also, on the negative side, there'd be gossip. Gossip is very bad.
So okay. So you're right. I mean, Harlan, you are picking specific areas which fall under mitzvot, right? So yeah. So here we're talking about this. So we want to explain, what do you mean place the blessing, right? V'natata et habracha. You shall give the blessing. Ketargumor. So Rashi says that the Aramaic, that onkelos has the right meaning here. Yat mevarchaya, that's the Aramaic. So yat mevarchaya means the ones giving the blessing, right? Those who bless. Et hamavarchim. So he's translating the Aramaic into Hebrew. Those who pronounce the blessing. So al har grizim. So al doesn't mean here on, literally. It means towards, right? Towards Mount Grizim. Klape har grizim, right? So the word klape makes it clear. This is the Talmud reference to this, right? Towards har grizim. So he goes on to explain it and clarify. Hofchim pneihem, they turn their heads. Ufatchu bivracha, and they start the blessing. They start pronouncing the blessing. Baruch Ha'ish, and this is taken from the latter portion in Deuteronomy, where the specific blessings and curses are mentioned, and that's in Parshat Ki Tavo. We have quite a ways to go before we actually get to that particular thing. But what is stated there, if you go to Parshat Ki Tavo and you see those, you see that they're mentioned as curses. So in other words, it says, cursed be the man who blah, 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 and like there's this whole series of curses. And so what Rashi explains, and what our tradition tells us, is that that's just an abbreviated way of how it was actually done. Because with each one, even though the Torah just mentions the curse, they actually would start off by saying, Baruch Ha'ish, blessed is the man, asher lo ya'aseh pesel u'masecha, who does not create a pesel, a statue, right, or a graven image, etc. So as a curse, it says, cursed is the man who makes a statue or a graven image. V'chol ha'arurim shebarsha. So he goes on, clarifying again, all the, quote, curses, right, where it says arur, cursed. The Parsha, in that section, amru tchila belashon baruch. They would start off actually, when they actually got to do it, they would start off by using blessed. And then afterwards, right, they turn their faces towards Har Grizim, they would recite the blessing, and after this, they turn their heads, their faces, klape Har Eval, towards Har Eval, towards Mount Eval, upatchu beklala, and then they would start to say the curse. So I'm going to stop here, and this is going to be the end of this morning's little session. So I'm going to stop the recording.
I